Chris Peterson, normally a pretty quiet guy. He's the head coach of the University of Washington football program. Normally a pretty quiet guy when it comes to the media. This week he voiced his displeasure about having to play games that start at 7:45 p.m. West Coast time.
Mm-hmm.
So I need both your thoughts about his comments and if they are valid, if they are invalid. What do you make of his comments?
All right, let me tell you about the biggest problem in college football.
Oh, look at the college football player breaking down with an all right. I can't wait to hear this one. It's going to be so good. Go for it, DJ.
At least at Division I. The West Coast does not get enough love.
Okay.
And part of the problem is these late games, especially with you really only have one Power 5 conference on the West Coast, and that is the Pac-12. Peterson said in his press conference on Monday, "I just want to say something to our fans. We apologize for these late games. We want to play at 1 p.m. It hurts us tremendously in terms of national exposure. No one wants to watch our games on the East Coast that late, and we all know it. We haven't had a kickoff before 5 p.m. this season." So that's a problem within itself. You haven't had a kickoff before 5 p.m. all season. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. And we all know that that's where a lot of the voters are from. And so a lot goes into this. UW is outscoring their opponents right now this year 220-54. So granted, the knock on them, they haven't played a strong schedule, but dang it, they've beat the teams 220-54. A team is taking care of their business when they need to, and they have moved down in the rankings once. They've been right around that 6th and 7th ranking, and Georgia just this week jumped them. They did beat a really good team in Auburn, but that shouldn't matter. A team is taking care of their business, and they are not getting the exposure that they deserve, and it is hurting the Pac-12 in general.
There are 4 teams inside the top 20 from the Pac-12, and they're not getting enough love. Seth, what do you think about the late-night comments?
I absolutely agree with you, DJ.
Wow.
Yeah, I know I'm being lame, but
Thank you, Seth.
It's hard for me to feel any differently when you have a team that was good enough to be in the college football playoff last year, and they're not getting any primetime games at all. They're playing at 11 o'clock Eastern time. Nobody on that half of the country is going to be up to watch the Huskies play when they're one of the best teams in the nation. They should be getting national exposure.
They haven't given anybody a reason to not put them within that playoff conversation. And they were one of Alabama's best teams that they played last year in closest games. Christian,
you know what? You know why they're not on primetime? Because no one wants to watch the University of Washington beat down on Rutgers, beat down on Montana or Montana State, whichever Montana school they played, beat down on Colorado. Like, those aren't games worth watching. You know who was on primetime? WSU and USC on Friday night, and it was a great football game.
But the Alabama games are always televised. Doesn't matter if they're playing Clemson or if they're playing Alabama State.
And they just beat Vanderbilt 59-0. How fun of a game is that to watch, I'm fine with these Thursday and Friday night games because there are no other games to watch, so you're going to get exposure through that. So, it really bugs me on a Saturday night that you're playing at 7:45, which is like almost pretty much 11 o'clock Eastern, like you said, Seth.
Mm-hmm.
And that hurts the Huskies. You got guys like Miles Gaskin, who's averaging 7.09 yards per carry. That's almost a first down every time you run. And Jake Browning, he had some Heisman conversation early on. He's thrown 12 touchdowns and only 3 picks. So these guys are worth noting and getting exposure. A guy from UW isn't going to win the Heisman or have a chance if he's playing at a time that late to where you're excluding like half the voters from the East Coast.
And to Christian's point, I think it will help if they schedule some better teams in that non-conference.
There's no doubt about that.
But they can't do anything about the 9 games in conference that they're playing every year. Those are going to be West Coast games no matter who you're playing.
Yes.
Did we mention the recruiting aspect that Chris Peterson also mentioned about how it's hurting his chances of landing a kid from Texas or a kid from Georgia or something like that? Have you touched that point yet?
No, we haven't touched
because
that
it's
point.
false, and I don't think it's a real thing. The way that people in general view sports is so much different now than it has been in the past, that just because they play a late game doesn't mean that they're not seeing University of Washington highlights on Instagram or something like that. Like, it's so much different, and especially, like, put it in our perspective, a job hunt. Like, if we have an interview set up with someone, we're going to put all we can into knowing as much as we can about those people before we go do that interview.
I think it doesn't hurt recruiting as it does national exposure.
He made that claim, though. He said it was hurting him there, but I don't think that's accurate.
I don't think it is either. That's why I wanted to touch on the Pac-12 as a whole and just national exposure. Because, like I said, you could have guys like Myles Gaskin and Jake Browning maybe getting more Heisman talk than they are now.
I don't know. I'm not bought in. I don't think they played good enough games to be nationally exposed. But I also think, I think it works enough to get them exposure by the general audience. I mean, people who are into football are really into football. I mean, on that East Coast, if you're having a nice little Saturday fun day, whatever you want to call it, you'll probably stay up late and see what's going on with UW and whoever they're playing that night, right?
Yeah, you could try staying up late, but you might take a nap between the second and third quarter.
That is
because you're too dang tired to stay up.
Great point.
Yeah.